and welcome to the Whitman Freedom Team. A new episode today, and with a new guest, which who will be recognized by Tom Evans in a second. I'm Mike Kryzanek, and I'm a member of the Whitman Freedom Team. And if you look at our back poster here, we're for interested in love and inclusion and trust and civility and bringing the community of Whitman together in order to enhance the ability of people to live a free and open and effective life in Whitman. And as a result of that, I think we've made some significant progress, and we're fortunate today to have another guest who has worked very, very hard in order to advance the goals of the Whitman Freedom Team. So I'll turn it over to Tom Evans, who is the top man here in the Whitman Freedom Team, the founder of this organization. So Tom?
Thank you, Michael. Welcome. It's my pleasure today to introduce Chris DiOrio. And I'm going to read from it. This man has done so much in so little time, and it's really just a snapshot of what he's been able to do. Chris DiOrio is the staff attorney for the National Lawyers Guild Litigation Committee. Chris has been in the front lines of fighting for individual rights for over 30 years. After graduating in 1991 from Boston College Law School, Chris started his career as a legal aid society public defender in New York City. Then he moved to Massachusetts, where he's been a trial lawyer, as well as a civil rights and liberties and constitutional law professor, educating students from ages 8 to 80. In 2018, he took his mission to Uganda to work with the Foundation for Human Rights Initiative on reforms of their criminal bail system and to assist death row inmates at Luzira Prison. Chris' community involvement includes assisting numerous pride groups on the South Shore to form nonprofit programs. Having been given away over, from the nonprofit organization, as well as being an integral part of the Whitman PRIDE here in Whitman. He has also created the Constitution for All, which is a program that has given over 10,000 copies of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights to individuals, community groups, and schools all over the country. He lives here in Whitman with his brilliant triathlete wife, Leslie. He's the father of 4 kids, including 2 are members of the LGBTQ community. Before I start this very serious discussion, I want to ask you about a slinky.
Absolutely.
Oh. And you could tell us.
A slinky is the first reason why I was put in jail as an attorney, and it's happened more than once. There was a law at the beginning of the Giuliani administration in New York where they were starting to do quality of life and broken windows policing, and they decided to start enforcing a particular statute that said if you were in possession of any and all quantities of copper, any type of wiring or pipes or things of that nature without proof of ownership, then that was a misdemeanor punishable by up to 2 years in jail and a $1,000 fine. My wife at the time, as a graduation gift from law school, had given me a slinky, but it was a gold-plated slinky. She had it electroplated in gold. Her father was a jewelry merchant, and so she had this gold slinky, and I kept it with me in my briefcase constantly. I went to arraignments in New York, and in New York, the courts are open 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365. So I'm working night court. It's about 11 o'clock in the evening, and a person comes in. I pick them up in the arraignment bin, and they are charged with possessing pipes, copper wire. People were stealing stuff from construction sites and selling it back to them at 10 cents on the dollar. Mm-hmm. So prosecution makes their case for bail. This is obviously a homeless person, a person who's unhoused, and judge sets $2,500 bail on this person, which means you're going to stay in. So before they set the bail, I go over to my briefcase when it's time for me to make a bail argument. I take my slinky out and I start to play with the slinky in open court, and the judge says, for the record, Attorney DiOrio is manipulating what appears to be a slinky. Yeah, Your Honor, this is a slinky. It is gold-plated, but underneath it is copper wire. I don't have a receipt for this. I don't have proof of purchase or proof of ownership. I can tell you that I got it from my wife, but I have no proof of ownership. So if you're going to maintain the standard that you've been using and that the state of New York has been using to punish the poor, for as long as this administration's been in place, then rightfully you need to arrest me right now because I have no proof of ownership of this coil. Otherwise, you should be releasing my client and admit that this is a forlorn policy. And Judge Espinoza looked at me very calmly, smiled, said, "That's a well-placed argument, counselor. Court officer, please take Mr. DiOrio into custody." Walked over, took the slinky, bagged it, put the cuffs behind me, and walked me in for about 4 or 5 hours. I got to sit there in a suit with the rest of the folks who had been brought in overnight. And then they finally called my supervisor to come in and get me. And at the end of the night, when all of the cases had been heard, they brought me out back in front of Judge Espinoza, and I had to make my apologies and say, I apologize for making the court look bad.
Yeah.
So they let me out. So that's my slinky story.
There you go.
And I still have the slinky. It's still in my briefcase. I've had it for 30 plus years, and it's still in good condition because I don't play with it.
Yeah.
They mentioned that you mentioned this during the Giuliani administration.
Yep.
Now they took most of his possessions, including the rings from the New York Yankees.
Absolutely.
Does he have the slinky or not?
No, they gave me the slinky back. I was allowed to take it out of the evidence bag when they just held me. They wanted to make sure that I knew just how serious it was to make Judge Espinoza look bad in court. So I did
So
what
you
I was.
still have it?
Oh, I absolutely do. It's in my briefcase at home right now.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, Chris, now to the serious part.
Thank
What motivated you to become a lawyer, and can you tell us a little bit about your career as an advocate for people's civil rights?
I think it started for me as I've always, as a kid who grew up, with faith, and it was always impressed upon me that you serve others. And so I looked at things where looked at possible professions where I could be in service to others. And I had settled on 3. It was either going to be a Catholic priest, an orthopedic surgeon, or a trial attorney. My father worked as a college basketball and baseball coach, so I'd been around athletes all my life, and I really wanted to maybe do that. The Catholic priest went out the window when I was 9. But when it got down to the 2, and I thought just that I could do more for people like from where I grew up in practicing law. I grew up in an underserved community in Bridgeport, Connecticut. There were times where we had our own financial difficulties, and I saw how people who were underserved and underserved communities were treated. That sort of drove me to the type of practice that I had, and I think that the best way for me to use sort of innate and inbred skills to be able to express an idea, to be able to form an argument, to be able to think logically. Most attorneys are cynics. That was born into me as well, and to be able to not necessarily take something at first blush, but be able to be willing and then able to ask the next question. Always keeping why. And why not right out there in the front, so that you're never. Yeah. So that's sort of what drove me there. And I've been. My practice has been around serving, as I started out as a public defender in New York City, and still maintain in my practice and my teaching, working with underserved communities.
Very good.
Well, Chris, I see you have your Whitman PRIDE shirt on. I don't know if you want to give it some more exposure there, so to speak. But can you give us some examples of how people from the LGBTQ community have been perhaps mistreated or not supported properly, whether it's in this community or elsewhere? I
think you see it in this community in how we saw it a couple of years ago, and how hard people fought and came out over the crosswalks. Getting rainbow crosswalks at the middle school and at the high school. Former elected officials coming out and appearing at select board meetings to stand up against it, and appearing at what I found really upsetting was after the select board voted to allow for the crosswalks to be put at the schools and also at the library. Folks came out to the Board of Library Trustees meeting to put pressure on the library. And one of the arguments that they used was, well, the library is you can see the library from the church over there. And we're afraid that people coming out of the church are going to be offended by the rainbow. It just struck me as patently absurd that these people of faith who are supposed to believe in love and inclusion and in trust would somehow be offended by a rainbow on the sidewalk. It's not just endemic to this community. It's all over. Last year, in the last year's legislative sessions around the country, over 750 pieces of legislation brought that in some way would be discriminatory against LGBTQ students from college all the way down to lower levels in school. Over 400 of them dealing with transgender kids and denying them access to gender-affirming care, so-called bathroom bills and things of that nature. This is an ongoing struggle for people in the LGBTQ community, and we're seeing it now with the potential implementation of Project 2025. I mean, right the first few pages and over 375 references to LGBTQ and DEI and DEIJ things, they're coming after it. This new administration will come after these people simply for being who they are, to the point where they're referring to anybody who teaches about the existence of LGBTQ individuals, or specifically transgender or inclusion related to transgender students, should be deemed a pornographer and be found to be a registered sex offender. That's how far it's going. How does that look to students and people out there who are trying to be themselves, just to try to live their not just a chosen life, but the life that they were, that deep inside them, and to have people believe that you shouldn't even exist? That everything that you do is suspect, that you can't be trusted around students, that you can't be trusted around any other children of any. It cannot possibly be that we are still living in a society where we cannot accept that these people exist and that they're born this way. And so for me, pride organizations are essential in showing communities of all types that there is a place to go and somewhere that can advocate and educate and be a place of trust and honor for folks who are just trying to live their lives.
And I know, Chris, that you've started a scholarship program as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's true. We were very fortunate last year to give out our first Whitman PRIDE scholarship at the big event at the end of the school year with the Dollars for Scholars. And we were able to give out our first $500 scholarship to an LGBTQ student or ally at the high school going on into college, to Grace Cosgrave, who a tremendous advocate for her sister, and just a really fun to be able to do that for folks who are living their lives or are helping others live their lives as they choose.
Would you be willing to share some personal stories that illustrate how the mistreatment of any marginalized person can be life-altering and affect them forever?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're seeing, I had a person come up to me just after the election, and I'd had communication with them previously. They know where I stand on these issues, and they asked me, can I talk to you for a second? Sure, is it something important? Yeah, I need to talk to you over here. So he pulled me over to the side. We leaned up against a wall in the store, and he said, I just got a call last night. First thing, 5 o'clock in the morning from my daughter. She's 14 years old. She lives in Texas. She came out to me last week as being transgender. And she called me this week and said, Daddy, I'm scared. What am I going to do? She's living in Texas with her mother, a place that is notoriously against the gay community and against multiple laws against transgender youth. What am I going to do, Daddy? How am I going to live? Do I have to come home now? I don't feel safe anymore. This is a 14-year-old child that now has, and with a mother who is not accepting. She had to go to her father 2,000 miles away and say, Daddy, I want to come home. She wants to come here to Massachusetts where she believes that she'll be safe. And that's not a unique story. I've had other communications with people very similar to that, and that conversation is one of thousands that's happening all over the country. After the election took place and after the results were in, the number of calls to suicide hotlines from LGBTQ youth was up by 700%. There's a deep and distinct fear that the new administration will act against them, not just in minor ways, but in major ways. That they will, pursue further legislation, that they'll pursue further court actions to diminish and ultimately eliminate them.
Chris, what can we do in Whitman, some specific strategies, so to speak, that can help to alleviate some of this intolerance and unwelcoming attitude?
One of the goals of Whitman Pride is to educate, to be an outlet for folks, to educate about the culture itself, to allow for folks to have a place where they can come. We fought hard initially to, during Pride Month, and every year in June is Pride Month, we fought very hard with the folks who are trying to, get the rainbow crosswalks to also get a flag up the pole during Pride Month. That's been a hot button issue in a lot of communities locally and around the country. But having that happen and having the select board allow for the flag to go up the pole 2 years ago and again this past June, I thought, honestly, that I would have to come back and fight for it again and do it every year. No, Mary Beth Carter, said, no, that is something that is every year now. And people seeing that on the pole in this community, which just, voted for President Trump, it's a sign. It's a beacon. It may just be colors on a flag, but it is a beacon that there are folks here where you can feel safe. We want to educate folks at the in all levels of the school, working with the school librarians, working with the DEIJ folks in each school to provide access to information, provide access to information about the culture, provide access to safe learning materials and things for students to understand. But it helps if you start young. And it helps if you educate children so that they can start asking their own questions. It's not a question of indoctrination, as folks on the other side of this argument might say. It's simply saying, we exist, and here's who we are, and here's what we think, and we're not all the same. But we do exist, and we want our place in the world, and we want our place in this community. And there are a number of people in this community who are, in fact, members of the LGBTQ community. When I have my booth over at Whitman Day the past few years, the number of people who come through and say, I'm so glad that this organization exists here. And that, to me, is a godsend. That's enough. To know that there are folks out there who look to us as evidence that this community is not unwelcoming to them.
Part of what you're talking about, I've experienced it last year in another surrounding town. There was a dispute about displaying a sign that had to do with the rainbow in the school and the classroom, and went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And finally, a 10-year-old girl got up and said, you know what, I'm going to tell you what I think. My teacher has a little sign, this is a safe place. And other teachers have, this is a safe place. That sign means that we can talk about things that are bothering us or whatever it might be. And a rainbow or a flag says to a boy or girl coming to school, this is a safe place.
Yeah.
And I think we overthink some of the things we do because there are a lot of signs that show welcoming and that we're part of a group or whatever it might be. And I have a tendency to think that sometimes we overdo it. And it's funny, Mike's question is the same question I had with a little different twist. How do we get people to see both sides of the issue? Is that possible, or is that something that's futile?
I think it's always difficult if you're basing your position if it's rooted in an interpretation of faith. It's very difficult to tell somebody who believes that God said something that they're wrong. If you believe in an infallible God and God says this, well, you're kind of stuck. But what you don't, what people fail to recognize is, these folks who wrote the book years ago and wrote the various passages in the book, were speaking at a different time. They were speaking from a different place, and they believe that they're the mouth of God and putting the words down. But it's very difficult. I think you have to get people to realize that it's the notion of love and acceptance that is embedded in most, if not all, religious organizations and religious tenets, there is, acknowledgement of love and peace and understanding. It's those things that if you root them in you root your discussion in that, then it helps, as opposed to immediately jumping to Leviticus and starting to talk about all of those things. If you're, truly a person who is, if you're a Judeo-Christian and you believe in the Levitican rules, you immediately go to the notion that when Christ appeared and when Christ passed on the cross, all of those rules are washed away. All of those things are gone. The death on the cross eliminates the need for all of that. It makes us all new. But they're very stuck. They're very stuck in the Old Testament when they need to be.
Mm-hmm. Chris, in Whitman, are you able to give us some data about how many young men and women at the middle school or high school are?
We don't have specific numbers because the census data doesn't, allow for that yet. But I can tell you the number of outreach, the number of people who have reached out to me, and it's certainly significant enough that it means that the organization should stay. I know that in communicating with the folks at the high school, that there is a pretty decent-sized group of LGBTQ students and allies that also appear together and work together with that, and we're trying to partner with them to make things happen at the high school. More difficult when you're looking at, kids of younger age, but I would venture a guess that, just educated guess that if you're looking at the population itself, and you look at an estimate of anywhere between 10 to 15% of the population, I think that's roughly the same here.
That's a significant number.
It is. Yeah. It is. And it's good that they now feel like they can say, we do exist, that we should be heard.
Would you be able to give some resources or some suggestions to parents when their children inquire about questions that they hear on TV or outside or wherever it may be, and how to address that, and do they need help in that if they feel uncomfortable? What are your suggestions for that kind of a dialogue?
Most times what I would tell them is if they're in a community where they have a Pride organization, to reach out to them, and they'll have, if someone were to reach out to me and ask that question, then I direct them to, certain, if they need someone to talk about gender-affirming care or things of that nature, I direct them to friends of mine at Boston Children's and Mass General that deal with that, and I always err on the side of going to a professional. So I'm going to direct them in that sense. If I'm going to talk to them about just having the communication, it's going to depend on each individual parent. I remember when my elder daughter and my eldest and my elder son, both when they came out to me at different periods. With my daughter, it was a deep discussion, and my son just came out and said it. There was no deep discussion at all. Yeah. It was a completely different thing. But you're prepared at all points to just do what a parent does. Listen, at least what a parent should do. Sit and listen. If they're scared, show some affection. Put them in your arms. Don't let them get out of your arms until they're ready to go. Use the Disney rule. The Disney rule, if people are unfamiliar, is if you go up to a character at Disney, a kid goes up to a character at Disney and gives them a hug, the character is not allowed to let them go until the kid gives up the hug. So you can see it online constantly. If the kid goes in for a hug and stays there for 30 seconds, Snow White is going to stay there for 31. She's just going to stay until that hug goes. And I think if parents exercise that kind of empathy, it's more than just patting a kid on the head and saying we'll get through it. Maybe that's all it needs. But at some point you're going to have to make them know that they are loved for who they are, regardless of what change is coming, that you're there as a parent to do for them what they need to do. I told my daughter years ago, you're in for a fight. Not only are you a woman, but now you're a gay woman, and you're in for a fight. But here's the deal. I would step in front of a train or stand in front of bullets for you. Because you're mine, regardless of how you identify and what you say and who you say you are and would you choose a new name, you go do that, you're mine, regardless. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure that you stay mine, because I'm not losing you.
Yeah, very, very good.
Chris, you gave us that story about that gentleman with the daughter in Texas.
Yeah.
How was that resolved? Was it resolved in a way that we can find some encouragement here?
It was fairly recent, and a lot of this is because you're dealing with Texas, which is decidedly, on the far right side of the discussion, as opposed to Massachusetts. The issue then becomes for this person, because the child has been in Texas for a certain period of time, you now have to go to Texas. And if you're going to move to modify a custody arrangement, you have to go down there to make it happen. The father and the mother are not communicating well, which is going to be, and the child has not yet told the mother. Mm-hmm. The child's afraid. The mother is an evangelical Christian. She's afraid she's going to be put out. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, dad goes down and gets her and brings her home, and that's that. But if they can start it all comes down to communication. You have to be able to start the dialogue, and if there is no dialogue, it can't work, and then you have to put things in the hands of a judge. The sooner you can stay away from a judge, the better. Work it out. If the kid's going to be better served here, the kid should come here. If the kid's going to be scared down there, the kid should be up here. And that's what. And I told him, whatever you need me to do, professionally, then I'll do that. But it's in the very early stages. So, you'd like to think that they'd be able to make something happen, but. Again, the discussion and the dispute there, it's not unique, and it happens thousands and thousands of times across the country every single day, where kids come out to their parents and they're put out. The number of people in my community, the number of friends that I have who have had absolutely negative experiences when they said to their parents, I'm trans, I'm gay, I'm non-binary. If parents don't understand what that means, and if they're not willing to accept, then you've got a kid who doesn't have acceptance in their life, and they're going to look for it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. Bottom line should always be, don't lose your kid. Mm-hmm. Whatever it takes, don't lose them, because once you lose them, they're gone.
Yeah. Such a simple rule, right? It's not that difficult to.
No, if you just base it in that, people, Tom said it earlier, they overthink things. That's your kid.
Yeah.
Do what it takes.
Yeah.
If they don't feel the love from you, they're going to find it somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And it may not be something that's safe. Mm-hmm. They're going to go into the arms of a potential predator. They're going to go into whatever it is, and that's where you find it. You look at the statistics, and people who are in the LGBT community from age 25 down to age 11 are 8 times more likely to have suicidal thoughts. Mm-hmm. And they are 45% is the number of these folks who've actually thought about it. And of that group that's thought about it, 1/3 of them have actually made an attempt on their own lives because of situations like that, where they lack acceptance, where they lack a sense of belonging, where they have so much frustration and so much terror about what their life is going to be going forward. For them, the only way out is out. And that's tragic. You look at the normal heteronormative cisgender kids at that same age. The number of folks, the number of people who have suicidal ideations or make suicide attempts is so far below where it is for folks in the LGBTQ community, and it's tragic.
Yeah. You made reference before how times have changed and it's not the same and so forth. The couple of analogies that I think about from my lifetime, and that is alcoholism. Alcoholism was this, in many cases, they were drunks, they were not good people, they didn't support their family, they wanted to do it, it wasn't, they didn't think about anybody else but themselves. And then we had substance abuse, which again, the judgments that they passed down, people in those years was severe, and today even some of them people will disown their children for a situation that is really needs a lot of compassion, needs a lot of love, and I guess when part of what the Whitman Freedom Teams try to do is not to be right, but to be open for people to say there are other pathways rather than doing this or doing that, and how can we help? And so one of the things that I'd like to ask the public out there, is there anybody out there who would like to have a show that would help us with a situation, whether it be on LGBTQ or anything else? Our community is becoming more racially diverse. I embrace it. I think it's great. I don't know how they feel, although we've had a couple of people speak on our shows about some of the challenges they face. And so this kind of conversation, although it might be difficult for some people to listen to, you have to. And if you don't, and you don't have a conversation, you don't have an open mind, then we'll never move forward. We really never
What's
will.
important about what you're talking about with those two analogies, alcoholism and substance abuse, folks at still now, but back then, thought that this was a choice.
Yeah.
And now we have a better understanding medically, psychologically, that alcoholism and substance abuse disorders and addictions of those types are inherent to the person, that you're inclined to be that way, and all it takes is a trigger. And it's the same thing with folks in the LGBT community. It's not a choice. Who would choose a life where they are more likely to be abused and beaten and mocked and ridiculed and at the extreme level, beaten to a bloody pulp and tied to a fence in the middle of Wyoming, as Matthew Shepard was, and he's just one of thousands of stories like it. It's not a choice. It is who someone is, and we don't punish people for who they are.
Yeah.
We help them. We get them through.
Chris, do you see kind of a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, with regard whether it's Massachusetts or nationwide? Are we on the upswing here in people accepting individuals who are LGBTQ, or is it stagnant, or is it in reverse?
You know where it's coming from? It's coming from kids. It's coming from kids. It's coming from students.
Yeah.
They're less likely at certain ages to even think of it as being an issue anymore. The problem is in folks my age and beyond. You're entrenched in a certain belief you believe that it's a choice. You believe that it's that it's an abomination. If you believe all the rhetoric that goes with this stuff, if you're stuck in that mindset, it's very difficult to get out of it. But kids these days, because of education, because we're talking about these things in classrooms, because we're allowing these people to be who they are, it's less of an issue now. It's hardly an issue at all if you talk to most high school kids as to whether somebody's LGBTQ or not. It's not a matter to them. It's basically, are they a good person? Period. Sentence, paragraph, story. That's it. Are you a decent human being? And that's all it really takes to be with these people. Be a decent human. Right? That's all it takes. So in terms of the question, I think we're getting better at that level because the youth will be good about it. The problem is the power right now is not with the youth. The power is in the folks that are above it. Yeah. And so they're the ones who are doing all the legislating, and they're the ones who are doing the things to keep this down. And all they're doing is fanning a flame.
Yeah. Before we break up here and before Tom sends us off, I just want to remind people that they can watch this program on Whitman Cable, and they can also watch us on YouTube as well. We've got some good number of hits for past programs on there, so we want to welcome you to spend some time listening to this excellent presentation by Chris on the LGBTQ community. But I'll turn it over to Tom to wrap us up today.
Sure. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Chris. Today's discussion was one of the richest we've had, in my opinion. A very controversial topic, which it shouldn't be, quite frankly. It's one that has to be had, and I appreciate your candor and your knowledge, to be honest with you. Whitman Freedom Team is, again, as Michael said, we are trying to go forward in this community to bring more love and inclusion and trust. We believe it's a real solid community. We really do. And those people who are part of that group of people who love and trust and accept others, please speak out when you have to. Don't be silent. Don't be a stand-byer. And so saying goodbye, and one reminder, we can be seen on our webpage is whitmanfreedomteam.org. So saying goodnight for thank you to you, Michael, and to you, Chris, Tom Evans. Peace.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. Okay.